The train did not slow so much as it surrendered to the emptiness. Steel wheels screamed once, then went quiet, leaving behind a single woman standing on a weather-beaten platform that barely deserved the name. No station house. No crowd. Just a crooked sign half buried in dust, and a horizon that stretched so wide it felt like a warning. This was the end of the line, not just for the railroad but for choices. She stepped down carefully, boots touching the dirt like she was testing whether the ground would hold. In one hand she carried a small case. Everything she owned. Every hope she hadn't yet buried. The wind tugged at her coat, sharp and impatient, carrying the smell of dry grass and distance. She had imagined hardship. She had prepared for hunger. But she had not imagined this kind of silence. The kind that presses in on your ears and asks what kind of life you think you deserve. The train hissed, coughed, and pulled away without ceremony. Just like that, she was alone. Then she saw him. He waited a short distance off, near a wagon that had seen better decades. A man in plain clothes. No hat flourish. No smile. Just a tall, still figure leaning against the rail. Eyes steady, face carved by sun and restraint. He looked exactly like what she had paid for. A poor farmer. A man with nothing extra. A man who would expect work, obedience, and silence in return for a roof. "You're the bride," he said. Not a question. She nodded. He took the case without comment and set it in the wagon. When he offered his hand to help her up, his grip was firm, careful. Not unkind. Not warm either. They rode without speaking. The land unfolded slowly, revealing scrub hills, dry creek beds, fences that ran longer than they should have for a man with so little. She noticed things then. The way the wagon path bent away from the main trail. The way the farmhouse, when it finally appeared, sat back from the open land, half hidden by trees. The way the windows reflected light like watchful eyes. This was not just poverty. This was caution. And as the wind picked up, carrying a sound she couldn't place, metal, distant, deliberate, she felt it settle in her bones. That this marriage was no simple bargain. The farmhouse rose from the land like it had grown there unwillingly, low, weathered and plain, with boards darkened by years of wind and sun. From a distance, it looked poor enough to match every expectation the bride carried. A man with little means. A life built on scraping by. But as they drew closer, the details unsettled her. The door was thick. Reinforced. The windows were small and set deep, some half covered from the inside. This was not a house built for comfort. It was built to endure. He dismounted first and scanned the horizon before opening the door, his hand resting near his belt out of habit, not threat. Inside, the air smelled of iron and old wood. Sparse furnishings. Clean but bare. A table scarred by use. A stove kept ready even in warm weather. No pictures. No softness. Everything placed with purpose. "You'll sleep there," he said, nodding toward a narrow bed set against the far wall. Not unkind. Just firm. She nodded, unsure whether to thank him. They spoke little as she set down her things. When she asked about curtains, he shook his head. When she moved toward the back door, he stopped her with a single word. "Don't." No explanation followed. Just a boundary laid like a line in the dirt. At supper, he sat with his back to the wall. She noticed how he listened between bites, how his eyes tracked every sound outside. He ate like a man expecting interruption. When she asked if neighbors were close, he answered, "Close enough," and nothing more. The silence pressed in, heavy as the locked doors. She realized then that this marriage was not the simple bargain she'd imagined. Safety here came with rules. Protection came with watchfulness. She was inside, yes, but every measure that kept danger out also kept her contained. That night, as he bolted the door and checked the windows one last time, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She was no longer exposed to the frontier's cruelty, but she was not free either. This house was shelter, and it was something else. A place that kept secrets as tightly as it kept people safe. Mornings came early on the farm, long before the sun had the courage to crest the hills. The bride learned the rhythm by watching him, how he rose without a sound, how the kettle went on before words ever did. They worked side by side in the pale light, mending wire, splitting wood, feeding stock. No talk. Just breath, muscle, and the scrape of iron on stone. In that quiet, she began to see him not as a stranger she'd married, but as a man shaped by careful habits meant to keep danger at bay. He wasn't cruel. He was contained. Every movement measured, every glance checking distances. When she stumbled carrying water, he caught the bucket before it spilled, steadying it rather than her. The restraint spoke louder than comfort. She noticed the way he stood with his back to walls, how his eyes tracked the tree line even while he worked. That kind of watchfulness didn't come from poverty. Came from memory. Her story slipped out in pieces like coins worn thin. She spoke of rooms she'd left behind with nothing but a letter and a promise. Of choosing the unknown because the known had become unbearable. "I didn't come for love," she said once, staring into the stove. "I came because it was the only door left open." There was no shame in her voice, only resolve. The courage it took to step onto that train sat quiet and heavy between them. His answers were fewer. A sentence here. Pause there. He mentioned a brother who never came back from a boundary dispute. A partner who trusted the wrong handshake. Violence that arrived dressed as business and left bodies cooling in the dust. He never named the acts, only the costs. When he spoke of loss, his jaw tightened, as if saying more would invite it back. The land began to tell its own story. She noticed fence posts set farther than necessary, lines that hinted at acreage beyond the modest spread she'd been shown. There were tools too fine for a poor farmer, ironwork maintained with the care of someone protecting an investment worth more than comfort. In the cellar she found crates marked with dates and tallies, grain stored like a promise. Not hoarding, preparing. One evening as the wind worried the eaves she asked him outright, "What are you hiding?" He didn't bristle. He didn't deny it. He simply said, "What I own isn't the danger. Who comes when they know, that's the danger." Silence settled again, thicker this time. She understood then. The quiet wasn't emptiness. It was armor. The plain clothes weren't poverty. They were camouflage. And the man she'd married wasn't small at all. He was careful, carrying the weight of land and loss in equal measure, choosing anonymity because survival demanded it. Out here quiet lives had a price. And they were both paying it, together now whether they were ready or not. They came just after noon, when the light was harsh and honest and there was nowhere for shadows to hide. Two riders appeared at the edge of the field, hats low, horses well fed. Not neighbors. Not friends. The kind of men who smiled without warmth and looked past faces to measure land. The farmer straightened the moment he saw them. Not in fear, never that, but in readiness. His hand brushed the doorframe as he stepped outside, as if counting distances already. The bride watched from the window, wiping her hands on her apron, feeling the air tighten the way it did before a storm. "Afternoon," one rider called, voice smooth. "Just making rounds. Seeing how folks are doing." The farmer nodded once. "We're doing." The men dismounted anyway. Their eyes wandered over the fields, the tree line, the barn set farther back than it needed to be. One of them crouched, picked up a pinch of soil, rubbed it between his fingers like he was testing flour. "Good land," he said. "Better than it looks." That was when the bride understood. Poverty was the disguise. Quiet was the shield. They asked questions that didn't sound like questions. How long he'd been there. How much land he worked. Whether he'd had trouble with rustlers. Whether he'd ever considered selling. Each word pressed a little harder, like a thumb on a bruise. "We keep to ourselves," the farmer said. The other rider smiled thin. "That's what worries people." The bride stepped onto the porch then, felt their attention snap to her. One of the men tipped his hat. "Didn't know you had company." "My wife," the farmer said. The word landed solid. Final. The riders exchanged a look. "Well," the first said, mounting up, "some folks don't like surprises. Wouldn't want misunderstandings about who owns what." As they rode away, dust hanging in their wake, the silence felt louder than gunfire. Inside, the bride turned to him. They weren't looking for neighbors. "No," he said quietly. "They were counting." She looked around the house. The thick walls, the locked trunk she'd noticed but never opened, the way he'd always kept maps folded and hidden. He'd told her he was poor because being poor kept men from asking questions. "And if they learn the truth?" she asked. His jaw set. "Then they won't ask anymore." Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere beyond the fields, interest had turned into intent. The work began without a word spoken. Before the sun cleared the low hills, the farmer moved with quiet purpose, the kind that came from long habit. He checked the rifle by the door, then the one beneath the bed. Ammunition was counted twice. Not rushed. Never rushed. Outside he walked the fence line, boots pressing old tracks deeper into the dirt, eyes reading the land like a ledger of debts yet to be paid. He showed her the narrow trail that cut behind the cottonwoods, the one hidden from the road. "If it comes to it," he said, "you run this way. Don't look back." She didn't argue. She studied the path, memorized the bends. By midday, the house no longer felt like a simple farmstead. Boards were shifted, windows half covered in a way that let light in but kept eyes out. He lifted a loose plank near the stove and revealed a shallow hollow beneath the floor. Dry, deliberate, used before. She understood then that this man hadn't survived by chance. He had planned for danger long before she arrived. "I can help," she said, when he handed her a bundle of nails. He hesitated. Just a moment. Then he nodded. She proved herself in the small ways first. Not flinching at the weight of the hammer. Not asking why certain routes mattered more than others. When he paused thinking, she watched his face and waited. When he decided, she moved. She noticed things, how sound carried across the field, where the grass lay unnaturally flat, where riders might gather without being seen. As the afternoon wore on, something shifted between them. The space that had once felt measured and careful began to close. He spoke more freely now, explaining why the barn door was reinforced, why the back fence angled the way it did. She listened without judgment. When she finally asked, "You've done this before, haven't you?" He didn't deny it. "Yes," he said. "And I lost things I thought I was protecting." She nodded once. "Then we do it better this time." That night, they sat at the table with a single lantern between them. Plans were laid out in short sentences. Where to stand, when to wait, when to act. No promises were made, but something stronger took their place. Trust earned through effort, through honesty, through choosing to stand together. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain or trouble. It was hard to tell which. Inside, the house felt different now. Not richer, not safer, but no longer empty. This wasn't just land they were preparing to defend. It was the beginning of a shared life. They came at first light, when the land was still undecided about the day. Mist lay low in the grass, clinging to fence posts and the edges of the fields like a held breath. The farmhouse stood quiet, smoke barely rising from the chimney, humble, harmless, exactly as it had been meant to appear. Then the hoofbeats cut through it. Not one or two. Many. Heavy. Confident. The kind of sound made by men who believed the ground beneath them already belonged to them. The bride was at the window when she saw them crest the low ridge. Riders spread wide, fanning out like a closing hand. Rifles rested easy across saddles. No hurry. No doubt. She felt her chest tighten, not with surprise, but with the cold understanding that the waiting was over. "They're here," she said. The farmer didn't rush. He rose from the table slow, the way a man does when he has already imagined this moment 100 times. He checked the door bar, then the windows, then reached beneath the floorboard and lifted the false panel she had only recently learned about. Inside lay the truth. Deeds. Survey maps. Sealed papers stamped with authority older than the men riding toward them. Proof of water rights, mineral claims, grazing land that stretched far beyond what any poor farmer should own. Enough land to make powerful men nervous. Enough to make them violent. "This is why," he said quietly, handing her a rifle. "This is what I hid." The first shot came before the riders reached the fence. A warning round tearing into the dirt near the porch. Splinters jumped. The quiet life shattered. Gunfire followed, sharp, sudden, merciless. Bullets slammed into the farmhouse walls, punching through wood, shattering glass. Smoke filled the rooms. The farmer fired from the side window, precise and controlled, dropping one rider clean before the rest even realized where the shot came from. The bride crouched beside him, reloading, hands steady despite the thunder in her ears. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't frozen. She was present. Fully. Terrifyingly alive. They circled the house, shouting demands. "You can't hide it anymore. We know what you got. Hand over the papers." The farmer answered with silence and another shot. A rider went down hard, horse screaming as it bolted. The men scattered, returning fire, trying angles, probing for weakness. Smoke drifted low, mixing with fog until the world narrowed to sound and instinct. Then came the fire. A bottle arced through the air, shattered against the porch, flames licking fast at dry wood. Heat surged. The bride moved without being told, hauling water, beating back sparks while the farmer covered her, bullets snapping close enough to feel. That farmhouse was no longer a home. It was a line. A man charged the door, reckless, desperate. The farmer waited until the last second, then fired through the wood. The body fell forward, heavy, final. Blood soaked into the dirt where crops had once grown. In a lull, brief, fragile, the bride looked at him. Smoke streaked her face. Fear burned in her eyes, but beneath it was something stronger. "I won't run," she said. Not loud. Certain. He nodded once. That was all. The riders regrouped, anger replacing confidence. They rushed together this time, believing numbers would finish it, believing fear would break them. It didn't. The farmer opened the floor panel again, dragged out the strongbox, and shoved it into her hands. "If I fall." "You won't," she said. But he finished anyway. "Ride east. Take this to the county office. Let the truth speak." She set the box down instead, lifted the rifle. "No," she said. "We end it here." The next minutes blurred into violence. Shots. Shouts. Men falling. Horses screaming. The bride fired when she had to, her aim true, her resolve terrifying even to herself. She was no longer the woman who arrived with a single suitcase. She was someone forged in the fire of choice. At last, the remaining riders broke. Fear finally found them. They fled the way they came, dragging wounded, leaving the dead behind. Silence returned slowly, uneasily. Smoke drifted from the farmhouse. Holes scarred the walls. Blood darkened the soil. But the house still stood. The farmer leaned against the table, breathing hard. The bride stood beside him, rifle lowered, hands trembling now that it was done. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent. Wealth had drawn blood, but it had not taken what mattered most. The gun smoke thinned with the coming light. What violence had come for the land was gone now, driven off by blood, fear, and the hard truth that some ground could not be taken cheaply. Silence returned the way it always did on the frontier, cautious and incomplete, like it wasn't sure it was welcome yet. Rain began to fall just before dawn, soft at first, then steady. It darkened the soil, washed the ash from the porch boards, carried the weight of the night into the earth. The land drank it in. So did the house. So did the two people standing side by side beneath the eaves, watching the storm do what it always had, erase what it could, and leave the rest changed. Inside, the farmhouse no longer felt like a place built to hide. Shutters were opened. The locks stayed, but they no longer felt like secrets. They felt like choices. Repairs were made together, broken boards replaced, glass swept away, the table set straight again. Simple acts but meaningful ones. This house had survived because they had stood together. She looked at him differently now. Not as a stranger she'd been sent to. Not as a poor farmer she'd agreed to marry out of need. But as a man who had trusted her with the truth, and stood when it mattered. He met her gaze without lowering his eyes. For the first time there was nothing left unsaid between them. This marriage had not been bought with letters or desperation. It had been forged in rain and fear and honesty, on land that demanded more than survival. And as the sun finally broke the horizon, spilling gold across fields he had hidden and a future they would now share, the frontier offered its rarest gift. Not peace without cost, but a beginning earned. Out on the frontier, folks learned early that wealth was a dangerous thing. Not because of what it bought, but because of what it demanded. Land could be stolen. Gold could be taken. Even a name could be stripped away. But what truly cost a man was what he chose to protect when the world came knocking with a gun in its hand. That farmer hid his holdings to survive. She came seeking nothing more than a chance at life. Together they learned that ownership wasn't measured in acres or deeds, but in the courage to stand honest when lies felt safer. In a lawless land, truth was a risk. So was love. So was building something meant to last. So let me ask you, friend, if you stood where they stood, what would guide you? Would you choose survival wrapped in secrecy? Or honesty knowing it might draw fire? Out here, every choice leaves a mark. If this tale made you pause by the fire, leave your thoughts below. Share what you would have done when the cost became clear. And if you wish to keep riding these long frontier roads with us, where stories are earned, not bought, then subscribe and stay close. The night settles now. Firelight holds steady against rebuilt walls. And side by side they claim a future no one can take.